Hi, welcome to Marlene at Home. And I'm Marlene from the Carroll County Public Library, North Carroll branch. And this episode is entitled, My Other Life, a Pastor's Wife. This is probably one of the hardest ones for me to do, and because it's near and dear to my heart, and I was a pastor's wife for almost 40 years, but many people have given me suggestions for Marlene at Home, but many have asked for me to talk about this, and I've delayed it for a really long time. It'll also be some funny parts too. I look back and think about the pastor's wives I had growing up, and they were very influential in my life. They were special friends to me even when I was a child, and they had such open homes and open hearts. And Dolores, Carol, a lady that we called Aunt Norma that wasn't our aunt, but another pastor's wife to me. And they had such servant hearts, and they just were involved in so many different areas. It was just amazing to me. You know, in 6th grade, I thought I wanted to be an airline stewardess, but that kind of changed as I grew up some. But being a pastor's wife was a lovely idea, but I just wasn't sure it was for me. One of my main concerns, I wasn't sure I'd be interested in guys that wanted to become a pastor. You know, I had my own wish list, my own ideas for what I would like to look for in a man, and pastors weren't on my list. But anyway, during my college years, doing some tougher times and some thinking about life questions, the Lord tried to, attempted and did, change my heart to my own plans and my own ideas. And I really began to consider full-time Christian ministry in some arena. I didn't know in which way. Since childhood, I've always been involved in my church. You've heard my sister and I talk about, we've sang together as children in churches and nursing homes and banquets and prisons and as guests. And almost every Sunday afternoon in various nursing homes. So we were already very active in our church. I mean, I was from a young teen helping in the nursery, helping with kids programs, being in the choir, playing my violin, being a soloist, all kinds of things, serving at banquets, that kind of thing. And so it wasn't something new for me to become involved in church ministry. When I met my husband, Paul, he kind of threw me a curve on our first date. I wasn't interested in becoming serious with anybody. It was just a date. But he asked me if I would be willing to go to the mission field if we would get married. And I was like, whoa, first date, what is this deal? And he said, it's not that I know that I'm going to be a missionary, but I don't want to date anyone who would be close to that idea. He said, now, as I said, I don't really know what God has for my future, other than I know I will never be a pastor. Like, you know, they're all like fat and bald, and I'm not gonna do that. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm ready to get out of this date. But anyway, that kind of changed as time went on. And so anyway, I always kid him that I married under false pretenses, with that thing of what he would and wouldn't do. The other reason he told me he couldn't become a pastor is that he hated ties, and he would never be wearing a tie all the time. So we see how that worked. But anyway, one of the things as he was finishing up college, one of his things that his dad recommended to him was that he continue his education, pass his bachelor's degree, go and get a master's in seminary, because whatever kind of ministry you might end up in, a seminary would be a great help. And Paul was really interested in Christian camping. He had done that through his high school years, his college years, and so I really thought that's where we were headed. But anyway, that kind of changed over time. I mean, I knew he was big into sports and he loved the outdoors, but I didn't know until after we were married. Suddenly he wanted to fish and hunt and do all these kind of things, and I was like, I never knew you did these things. And he said, well, I stopped while I was hunting for girls. So that's another thing. I mean, my family was into fishing and hunting, but anyway, I didn't know about him until after we were married. But we both come from a long line of full-time Christian workers. Paul's dad was ordained as a pastor. He was many years on staff at a Christian college, university, and then out of Paul's one of 8 children, 6 of the 8 brothers or brother-in-laws, matter of fact, 5 of them have been in the pastorate at different times. One other one has been in another full-time Christian ministry. In my family, there were pastors. My uncle, that was a great influence in my life. I'm sorry, not a pastor, but a full-time Christian worker. My sister's married to a pastor. Through past generations in my family and present generations in my family, a number of people in the pastorate or in ministry. And so it wasn't something that surprised me or that was, out of order, but here we were, going to move. The first 8 months we lived near my parents when we were married, but then after that we moved, and neither one of us have ever lived real close to our parents. When we went to seminary, we lived about an hour and a half or 2 hours from my parents, 12 hours from his parents. When we moved to Maryland, to the church in Maryland, about 2.5, 3 hours from my parents. So we were much further away from Paul's parents. We did get to see my parents periodically, but never that we were in our parents' backyard. When we moved for Paul to go to seminary, we just continued our tradition of being involved in a local church. And we just loved our 4 years there, where we did all the things we were used to doing. We both were in the choir. We both taught Sunday school for different ages. Paul led a college and career ministry. We always had young adults in our home. We did a lot of entertaining. I was involved with children's ministries. Just all kinds of things that we did, even in that time before we were in any official capacity. It's just something we did. And our first church and seminary were in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And we had a wonderful time. Paul would fill in doing occasional speaking here and there. And we just loved it. We were church janitors for several years there. So we did a number of things there at the church. And in those 4 years, those people really became our family. They became like adopted parents, grandparents to our kids when we had children. And so, matter of fact, when we did become the pastor of that first church, one of the men, it was reported to us, because we're never in business meetings or church business kind of things, but one of the men made the comment, I want to vote for this man to become our pastor, because any man that started out a church janitor has worked his way up. And I always crack up thinking of this dear man that is no longer with us, but Ed Randolph, when he said that. But the pastorate, how in the world did that work? Because Paul was very vehement that that was not something he would ever consider. So, the Lord had to get him in through a back door. When we finished seminary, Paul had a knee injury and had to have knee surgery, so he's laid up for a while, so we weren't going to be doing Christian camping that year. And so then, after some difficult circumstances at the church we attended, they needed someone to fill in as the pastor left. And so Paul filled in for a couple weeks, and then a little bit more until we can get some more people to speak. But as time went on, they just said to Paul, well, would you be willing to, he had said over and over, no, I'm not interested in the position of pastor. But would you be willing to stay on as interim pastor, so until we get someone? So we did that, and Paul did that, and he was ordained during that time. But in that year, I think he really saw his gifts, and through the encouragement of the dear, dear people at our first church, really appreciated his speaking, his love for the people. I think Paul hid the fact pretty well, although probably everybody knew he didn't really like a tie, but he wore one anyway. So just one of the things that I'm sure the Lord has a good sense of humor there. I never dreaded being a pastor's wife. I mean, I was afraid of what could I do, what couldn't I do. I really just loved working alongside of my husband, although we had different arenas, so we weren't like on top of each other. But I really felt as called to his position as a job that I would fill for myself. I know a lot of pastors' wives struggle with this, and it's just something different than my experience, and I had a wonderful experience. When I was a very new pastor's wife, I wrote in the flyleaf of my Bible, being in Christian ministry is never to be pitied, but always to be envied. And that's how I felt. I felt very honored to be in this position. I felt Paul always used to say the church probably pays us way more than we deserve. But I always felt very honored and very privileged and very thankful to the Lord for this opportunity and this experience. And so I tried to, somebody said to me, well, what's it like being a pastor's wife? And 40 years, how do you sum that up? And I'm not going to trust my memory. I just wrote down some things. Some of it are just going to be words, things that I was involved in. Of course, you already know music and children's ministries, and covered dishes became a major part of our lives. Whether I was making food for a funeral or for a bridal shower, a baby shower, a gathering of ladies, a covered dish dinner at church. I just love that, eating together, either at the church or at other people's homes or in our own home. Just anything, gathering with people. I love having my husband's meetings at our home or ladies' meetings at our home. I just love people coming. I'd always say, you can never have too many parties, you can never have too many people. Paul would always be concerned if we had enough chairs. And I was like, oh, we'll be fine. They can all spread out in all the rooms. But I just love that. There were ladies' luncheons. There was premarital counseling. There was weddings. There was hospital visits. There were funerals. There's the loss of losing people young and older. In my early years, a lot of time in the nursery when my kids were younger, kids ministries, Vacation Bible School. Of course, my favorite thing is entertaining and having people in my home, so lots of entertaining. We once had a wedding in our living room at our first home, and our first home was a parsonage, by the way. A home on the same road as the church, but down about a mile or so. And so that was a whole different experience. We moved in with empty rooms of furniture, no furniture in the dining room, no furniture in the family room, 2 empty bedrooms. You know, we had what we had when we got married. Our bedroom set was what I had was given on a used furniture for my 12th birthday, and then that was our furniture, and then it became our daughter's furniture, and now it's our grandkids' furniture, that kind of thing. It took time to accumulate things, and I must say, I laugh to think that people ask me for decorating advice or rave about something that I've done in my home, because my early years were early attic, and if you could see some pictures, that was embarrassing, but I was determined people were more important than the things that I had. I was a Sunday school teacher, for middle school ages and teens. There were the times when we would take in people from abuse situations, wives, husband-wife situation. For a number of weeks or months, we had some young child from a sexual abuse case from someone in her family. There were times we walked the journey with several people with racial hurts, people acting out against, I don't know, their fears or whatever, somebody different from them, or an interracial marriage. We were in that scenario a number of times. Some other things that I did for a number of years, I was the part-time church secretary doing the bulletin. And my kids will tell you how for many years our Saturday night activity was for the kids and I to fold bulletins and put them together and get them all ready for the morning. We had many small groups in our house. Unwillingly, I started a ladies' Bible study in my home on a weekly basis, and that became a lifelong ministry, as well as ladies' retreats and a global impact, being involved with missionaries around the globe. Our home just became a gathering spot. I'll talk about some more in a moment. You already know that Christmas is my favorite time of the year, so Christmas was a time when I would try and have as many parties in our home as possible. Starting from, I would have the kids from the church come over. I would pick like a 10-day span, and some days I would even have 3 parties on the same day. I love getting my house clean, decorated, and then just go from one party to the next. And if you have a little leftover punch from the afternoon luncheon, you could use that maybe as an appetizer for the evening dinner. And so at our first church, I did that, I don't even know, 12, 15 parties in a season. Have the neighbors come in, the children, have the older ladies come for a luncheon. The board members and their wives come for dinner, just all different configurations of any way I could have people come into our house over the holidays. And I never had been to a Christmas Eve service until at our first church, and I love it, and it's always been my favorite church service of the year ever since. I just wanted my home to be a gathering spot. One of the things I loved about being in ministry is that our kids could see us have our best friends be people that were very wealthy and be people that were very needy. And I love that broad expanse. I also loved having people come, stay in our home or around our dinner from many countries around the world. And I love the experience that our kids had in getting to know people from around the globe because they had visited in our home. There were many times I was like so unsure of answers or unwise for the situation. So for me, the Bible was the source that I constantly turned for peace and calm and wisdom and dear Lord, please help me with this scenario kind of thing. So large groups, during that time at my first church, 18 years, that's all we stayed, you know. He was just going to stay to fill in, but 18 years later. But anyway, is that we both Paul and myself, we really saw what gifts God had given us and how we might be able to use them. And so that was a very important part for that time. I laughed one day when I remembered something that my mother had told me as a kid. Learning to do chores and that kind of thing, I was never real excited. But one day I remember my mother saying to me, Marlene, I don't know what you're going to do when you grow up, because all you like to do is dress up and run. And I had been in ministry for a few years when I remembered this quote in the back of my head, and I thought, Mom, that's the life of a pastor's wife, dressing up and running. You'd have clothes for funerals, you'd have clothes for kids' meetings, you would have, but anyway, I loved it, and I did for all of my 40 years. And so I'm really thankful that the Lord called us to the ministry of a local church. And I know it's not for everybody. I know there's war stories, but Paul and I have been very blessed, and so I'm very thankful. So this just tells you a little bit about our first ministry, our first church, and in next week's episode, I'll talk about our second half of ministry at our second church.